Greetings from Mesa View United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m. and at 11 a.m. we gather for contemporary worship. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
The epistle reading this morning is from James chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at the ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is a place among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not be so. And the gospel reading this morning is Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Jesus said, "You have heard it, that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift to the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. So in your bulletin, you'll find that blue scripture inserts. On the back is a big place to write things to remember from today's service, so I invite you to take that out and make use of it during today's message. In Jewish tradition, every sin is ultimately atonable, that is forgivable in this life, except for one, and that is the sin of desecrating or profaning God's name, which can only be atoned for after death. Now, as Christians, when we think of profaning God's name, we usually talk about taking God's name in vain or cursing God, something along those lines. But according to Jewish tradition, the core desecration occurs when those who are most closely aligned with God, that is, people who claim to follow God, do something that would be perfectly legitimate for other people, but not for those who proclaim the faith. That is, when representatives of God appear to act in ways that do not adhere to the highest moral standards or adhere to the things that we claim are important, that their behavior reflects not just poorly on the faith, not just poorly on the church, but their behavior reflects poorly on God, and thus desecrates God's name. Now, in the daily baptismal prayer that we've talked about in the past, and there's copies of it on the welcome table if you'd like to see it, one of the things we pray for is that everything we do that day would honor God. But what if we thought about it not just honoring God, but also not dishonoring God in the eyes of others? Because what we do does matter. And so as we continue in our series on the kindness challenge, I had a number of people who came up to me last week and said, I think I'm going to undertake this for somebody. And all those who talked to me said it was for somebody who is not a professing Christian, or were not in the faith at all. They're non-believers. And what that means is that our actions towards them are even more important because what we do says something about the faith, about what we believe, and then we're going to apply that Jewish understanding about what we say about God. Because there are plenty of people who make a very bad example of what it means to be a Christian. You don't have to have the news on for very long in order to see something really, really bad going on. And now we're even using Scripture to justify bad or illegal behavior. But within this understanding, we have to understand that when we do something bad, not only do we defame ourselves and defame the faith in the church, but we desecrate God's name. As if that just needs a little more pressure to be added to our lives. And so then we continue thinking about kindness. And this series is based on a book of the same name written by Shanti Feldhahn. And there are 3 rules or steps, she says, to undertaking this challenge. We're going to go in reverse order. The first is to carry out kindness, do an act of generosity on behalf of the person that you would like to improve the relationship with. Do that every single day. The second thing is to find one positive thing to affirm or to praise about that person and tell them and tell one other person. And the first step, which is what we'll be covering today, is not to say anything negative about that person, either to them or to anyone else. And it's not that you get to pick and choose which of these you're going to do each day. We're supposed to do all 3 of them every day for 30 days for one person. You could do it just in the general practice of your life and practice kindness with everyone, but this is sort of one person you would like to improve a relationship with. And there is one optional rule for Rule 1, and this is for men. If you are doing this challenge for your partner, and that is that when Shanti Feldhahn originally started doing this, she found out that men would say, well, some men would say, well, if I can't say anything negative, I just won't say anything at all. I'll just stop talking to my partner. That will solve the problem. Which really isn't practicing kindness. And so she had to come up with a special rule specifically for men who are doing this for their partner. And so that is, this rule is then to give your partner your full attention and conversation for 15 minutes each day. And that's full attention, not that the game is on and you're sort of catching it out of the corner of your eye or you're checking emails while your partner is talking to you. Full attention, fully engaged, and not trying to solve the problem, which is what we men like to do sometimes, but simply listening to what is being said to you, paying attention to those scary words, emotions, and feelings. And the other step of that is, if you're engaged in a conflict with your partner, to stay engaged for 5 minutes longer than you would like to be engaged in that conflict. Unless your anger will lead you to do or say something negative. And then you say, I can't do this anymore, everything's going to be okay, and then say when you'll engage with them again. All right, so men, that's a special rule for you, and you can replace that with Rule 1, or you can do all 4 of them and really get bonus points. Now, for most of us, we don't really think that we're negative people. We might think negative thoughts, but the times it actually comes out are a lot less. And so we don't see the negativity that sometimes surround us and the things that we're doing that others perceive as necessarily being negative. And Feldhahn has what she says are 7 types of negativity in thoughts, word, or action that we need to be aware of as we're trying to think of how do we eliminate doing negative things in our lives. And I'm quite sure that everybody here is going to find at least one of these that you will sort of strike you to your core. And if you don't think that you're doing any of these, ask people around you, how do you see the negativity coming out of me? And then the second step is to be open to hearing about what is said here. And it's not what we think, because sometimes we do things that we don't think are negative or mean that are perceived that way by somebody else. And we have to be aware of how they're perceiving what we say and what we do. And the third step is to remember that practicing kindness takes effort and intentionality every single day. Richard Rohr says, if you don't choose daily and deliberately to practice loving kindness, it is unlikely for a year from now that you will be any more loving. So the first act of negativity is saying, this will be hard. Now, we bought into the lie that making changes in our life is something hard to do. And in reality, there are some things that we do that would be hard to change. But when we say it's hard, it's going to be even harder than if we had not started that way. And so if you want to say it's hard, then put a positive spin on it and say, what makes it great is that it's hard, because if it was easy, everyone would do it. Right? So it's hard. That's the reason I'm undertaking this task. But we can change our behaviors. We can change what we do and even what we think if we're willing to re-examine our priorities and pay attention to things we probably haven't paid attention to in the past. Because often when we're thinking about kindness, when we look at kindness in Scripture, kindness goes along with self-control. And kindness is mentioned along with patience. In order to be kind, those things have to become part of your life. That comes along with humbleness and meekness. Lots of things that lead us to being kind, or kindness will also lead us to those other behaviors. Now, the flip side of saying it's going to be hard is saying it's going to be easy. And if you say it's going to be easy, you're probably setting yourself up for failure as well. So one woman wrote to Feldhand and said she was doing the challenge for her husband, and she thought it was going to be really easy. And on the afternoon of the first day, she was yelling at her husband, "I'm doing the kindness challenge and you're making it hard." So we have to remember it's going to be somewhere in the middle of those. And we have to remember that our emotions and feelings are indicators. They are not dictators. That means that we can control them. We don't have to respond. If we're feeling anger, we don't have to respond in anger or irritation or whatever it might be. That we can feel those emotions, we can have those emotions, and we can still respond differently. And sometimes, especially at the beginning, you're just going to have to fake it. You're going to have to fake it until you make it. And often we think that our emotions drive behavior, but what studies have also found is behavior will drive emotions. That is, if you put on a fake smile, the same areas of your brain that are triggered, that would give you pleasure to smile itself, are triggered by a fake smile. The same thing happens with a fake laugh. Exactly the same areas of your brain are triggered when you're genuinely laughing. That is, what we do in our actions can actually change what our mind thinks is going on. But the opposite is also true, that our behaviors can also drive our thoughts. If we're acting negatively, then our mind will pick up negative actions. And so as we're thinking about kindness and relating to somebody, what we have to ask is, what's our desire? What do we want out of this? Do we want to prove that we're right, or do we want to improve the relationship? Because very rarely can you do both of those things. Now, the second way to be negative is through exasperation, irritation, or pointing out mistakes. And so we have a lot of nonverbal things that clearly indicate negative thoughts. We roll our eyes, we take that deep sigh or shrug our shoulders. All of us, especially mothers, have that face that clearly indicates, I'm upset, you better stop what you're doing right now. And so if we send out those nonverbal cues, even if we're trying to not say anything negative, we're clearly indicating to others negative thoughts. We're clearly saying to them, what you're doing isn't good for me. And then, of course, there are the things that we do say that are negative, like pointing out when somebody has done something wrong, not in order to correct it, but simply so they know that they did something wrong. And you can correct things while still being kind, right? You don't have to be mean in order to correct problems. It's correcting someone in an irritated way, or saying someone's name in an irritated manner. This drives Linda nuts, because I'll say, Linda! She's like, would you stop screaming at me? But she clearly knows that I'm upset about something, right? It's when we say absolute, you always, or you never. That's a negative behavior about somebody. And in most cases, Feldhahn says, this comes from us losing perspective, and more importantly, it's about making things about us. That you've done something to upset me, and my money and my time and my resources, whatever it might be, are more important than your feelings. When we think that, we're going to act out unkindly, even if the other person might deserve it. And so Feldhahn tells a story. She called a customer service number to try and deal with something she thought was going to take about 5 minutes, or should have taken about 5 minutes. 45 minutes later, and on the 5th agent having to explain the problem over and over and over again, you've all been there, she had lost her cool. And so the last agent's fixing the problem, and finally she says, is there anything else we can do to make this right for you? Have we taken care of your problem? She says, yes. And so the agent then said, well, Miss Feldhahn, I want you to know I really enjoy your books. Ouch! So here's somebody who's writing about kindness, practicing that unkindly to this agent. And they clearly deserved it because they weren't doing their jobs. But we need to remember that others deserve respect and they deserve kindness, even if they're doing something wrong. Even if they are wrong, they deserve kindness and respect. So the third act of negativity, this is one I struggle with, is sarcasm. Now, I'm one of 3 brothers. And so, as brothers, this is how we interact. If we think about, you can't say anything negative, don't say anything. If we didn't talk in sarcasm, we wouldn't talk to each other at all. And sometimes it's done in pure fun. Sometimes it's a way of protecting ourselves, our own emotions. And sometimes it has that edge of truth to it that puts somebody else in their place. But having been raised with sarcasm being how I interacted, then I married Linda, who's one of 3 sisters, whose sarcasm is not part of their interaction. And she kept saying, why do you do that? It's mean. Why do you keep being mean to me? And I'll be honest, and this is probably not, it sounds bad, but I didn't really take what she was saying until I read this book. And saw that, just because I'm not saying it with meanness as my intention, she's perceiving it as such. And therefore, I'm in the wrong. That there can be things with humor, but we have to remove the cutting side from the humor. And so I still do this, but I'm getting better at it, and I'll say something, and then it'll dawn on me, and I'll say, I'm sorry, I just said that. Because I know that it came out differently than the way I intended it, and I'm sorry I hurt you. And so we have to be cognizant that we can say something, and the other person can hear it in a totally different way. And kindness is not about how we intend things, it's about how they perceive what we said. And so in Proverbs, as we heard in James today, we hear that words can build up and words can destroy. That James says a small flame can set the entire world on fire. But if we deprive that of oxygen and fuel, the flame will go out. And so not using negative language causes that flame, deprives negativity of oxygen and fuel so it can't continue to spread. And there are times, I think this is especially true for guys, where sarcasm and trash talking come into play, but those cases are limited and very clear. When you're on a basketball court, kindness might not be the thing you're after. Sarcasm and trash talking kind of go along with that. But in a relationship outside the basketball court, that stuff has to go away. And the other way that we use sarcasm is as a way of deflecting things that people are saying to us, especially compliments that come to us. And so someone will say to us, "Oh, your daughters are so well behaved," and our instant response is, "You should have seen them this morning." Right? And so what we've just said is, "Thank you for your act of kindness, take it somewhere else." Rather than just accepting that compliment and saying thank you and celebrating that they were doing the right thing at the right time and in the right place, we push that compliment away. So we can use sarcasm negatively to ourselves rather than just celebrating the compliments that come to us. The fourth negativity is grumbling. And grumbling leads us to have less enjoyment, less pleasure in what we have because we're focused on the negative things. And so if you've posted something on Facebook and there's 100 comments and one person has something negative, what's the one we obsess about? That one negative, we forget about the 99 positive. Or you got your report card and you had 5 A's and a C. What's the first question you were asked about? The C. What happened there? Not celebrating the 5 A's. I mean, it's important to say, why do you have a C? What can we do to improve that? But we pass over the positive and go immediately to the negative. It's about discounting the good things that have happened in the past because of the immediate, so what have you done for me lately? And this too can come with a dissatisfied tone that we use. It's wondering or saying, "What were you thinking?" Or saying, "If only you had done this, it would have worked correctly." It can also be negative towards ourselves and to others. If only I had done something, or if only I hadn't done something, that negativity can eat us up. And it's emphasizing the difficulties of the current situation. And the current situation might indeed be difficult. This is not to push away and say that bad things don't happen. And we may be entirely justified in being hurt or irritated or even angry, but it's about the pattern of our response. Are we always hurt and irritated and angry, or is that the exception to the rule? Is our noticing that one C and forgetting about the 5 A's the exception, or is that how we normally observe things? In his letter to the Philippians, Paul says that he has learned to be content in all situations. And he calls, by example, for us to do the same. And contentment is not about being complacent. Right? Contentment is about having joy and happiness in our lives regardless of what is going on. Even in the valley of the shadow of death, you can have God's joy present for you. So we have to ask, do we routinely find ourselves filled with discontentment or contentment? And if we are discontent, you can be assured that other people know that we are discontent. And as Feldhahn says, who's to say that we're not already happy? We just haven't realized it yet. So rather than obsessing on what's wrong, let's obsess on what's right. Obsess on the blessings in our lives. Now, the fifth way that we are negative is with a tit-for-tat attitude, or they hurt me, I'm going to hurt them. And while few of us would think that we are bitter people, the definition of bitterness is feeling or showing anger, hurt, or resentment because of bad experiences or a sense of unjust treatments. That means that most of us, or maybe all of us, have been bitter at some point in our lives. That when we rehash those old hurts and wounds, when we're repeatedly irritated by someone because of what they've done to us, when we vent to others about what others have done to us, then we're being bitter. This is also shown with an inability or difficulty of forgiving somebody for what they have done to us. A pulling away or shutting off relationship because of something that's happened. Or impulsively expressing irritation, anger, or resentments. Again, there might be significant reason. We might have clear justification for being angry and hurt. But how do we respond to that in the world? And is our response helping or hurting the situation? Is it helping or hurting us? Because I'm sure all of us know that one person who's still sort of festering on something that happened to them. 5, 10 years later, they're still angry, maybe about an ex. That's one I know. That she's still obsessed. 10 years later, her ex-husband's still controlling her life. Because she thinks by drinking poison, I'm going to get back at him. She's making her life more miserable. And when we don't focus on the other person's faults, and we'll talk much more about this next week when we're talking about praise, then we're less likely to notice the negatives. And when we don't talk about those faults, we're even less likely to obsess on them. And in fact, of those who have done the kindness challenge for their partners, 2/3 of them said that their tendency to talk about their partner's faults declined at the end of 30 days. Because they were focused on other things, like the positives. It also helps people, and it helps us, to notice our own faults, the ways that we fall short, the ways that we hurt other people. And when we begin to see that in ourselves, then we're much greater to show compassion and understanding to others, and we're much more likely to give forgiveness, because we have had to go out and seek forgiveness for ways that we have hurt people. Now, the 6th form of negativity is suspicion. And this is another one that we might not necessarily think as a negative, because if we're suspicious, we feel justified in that action. And there are, again, reasons why we might be suspicious of someone. But this, as a negative activity, is saying things like, they didn't forget to send me an invitation to that party, or to that meeting, or to whatever it was. They just didn't want me to be there. Or they said that because they knew it would hurt my feelings. Or they didn't really mean that compliment, they had to say that. They were doing a kindness challenge, they had to be nice to me. And that list could go on and on. It's a negative mindset that tends to feed on itself. And again, there might be legitimate reasons for being suspicious, but normally when we're suspicious of someone else, it's because we're not giving them the benefit of the doubt. That we assume the worst intentions for the other person. We assume the best of intentions for ourselves, and we want people to assume the best of intentions from us, but we assume the worst of intentions from somebody else. And even more, it's an extremely self-centered position. Because what it says is that basically everybody else in the world, they're making all their decisions based on us. They did that because of me. And in fact, you really don't spend most of your time thinking about other people when it comes to decisions we make. So if you're looking to do this, make the best generous explanation for the other side of what they did and why they did it. And the final negativity is catastrophizing everything. That is saying, if such and such happens, that'll be a catastrophe. If this person wins the election, everything's going to fall apart. The worst things will happen. It's expecting gloom and doom from what others do, especially those whom we don't like. and assuming that nothing will work and that everything will bring about the worst possible outcome. So if you say things like, they're ruining X, Y, or Z, that's catastrophizing. Or if you say, this will be a disaster, or that's not right, how dare they, you're practicing this activity. And again, some things might be a disaster, but that's much rarer than what we think. And it can lead us to be remarkably unkind because we think we're justified in whatever response we have, because we need to stop that from happening. And sometimes then we create a worse situation than where we started. And a lot of this has to do with trust in learning to let go. Especially learning to let go of the comfort of feeling aggrieved. But it's also learning to let go of other things. Maybe there's that thing that you've always had control over, and when the other person does it, oh my God, they didn't do it correctly. They didn't do it the way I wanted it to, and it's the end of the world. That everything we're going to hell in a handbasket. That's one of my favorite phrases. Daughters always ask me, where are we going? I say, to hell in a handbasket. But when we're focused on that the world is falling apart or will fall apart, we can't be focused on the positive things. And we can't begin to learn to deal with people that we might not like, but might have some good ideas. Because when we say, oh, that person gets elected, it's all over. The race in Alabama with the accusations that were made this past week, one Republican leader said, I'd vote for Satan over a Democrat. Really? I mean, there's Democrats who would say exactly the same thing. But really, that's catastrophizing. That anything that they bring is not of value. That's a negative activity that we're bringing into the world. So James tells us that the words we use matter. That negative words can set the world on fire, but the opposite is also true, that positive words, kindness, can also set the world on fire. And Jesus tells that what comes out of what we think will come out of us. That our thoughts will lead to words, and our words will lead to actions. And that's the reason he says that if you're angry at a brother or sister, it's the same, you'll be held to the same judgment as if you'd murdered somebody. Because our anger can lead to words, and our words can lead to action. But the opposite is also true. That our actions can lead to our words, and our words can lead to our thoughts. And it's okay to be angry. There's lots of times in Scripture we're told to be angry about things. And there are things that we should be angry about. What are we angry about, and what are we going to do about it? Is our intention to make the world better because of our anger? Or is it simply to lash out and let everybody know how we're thinking? By focusing on practicing kindness and eliminating negativity in our lives, focusing on the positives, we can transform our lives, and we can in turn transform the world. But as James also says, perfection's a pretty high standard. And so if you think, I'm going to undertake this and I'm going to be perfect in expressing no negativity, you're not going to get there. And so don't hold yourself to that standard. Simply, when you express negativity, learn from that. What did I feel? How could I have stopped that? Did I need to take a 3-second pause, or maybe a 10-second pause, or did I need to walk out of the room and then come back in order to engage in that situation in a different way? It's okay to make mistakes and to learn from them. But kindness is only realized when we do it. Thinking about kindness doesn't do anybody any good. Kindness is something we live out. So, my brothers and sisters, I challenge you to work on removing the negativity in your life and to focus on the positive. and to learn not to think or say or do anything negative to someone or about them to others. I pray that it will be so, my brothers and sisters.